There was a reoccurring theme, a historical theme that went all the way back to George Washington. That was in my pride and my arrogance, this was too rich, too good, too colorful not to include.
Because it's part of growing up?
No, there's a theme that there is a very ambitious parent and there's a child on the receiving end that's anointed, like Joe Kennedy Jr.
Sure.
And there's another child that's in the shadows looking on with envy, and again, it's the child in the shadows who becomes president. It's not Joe Kennedy Jr., it's Jack. It's not Milton Eisenhower, it's Dwight. It's not Lawrence Washington, it's George Washington. And what I saw in George W. Bush very dramatically is that he put himself in the shadows. He was the firstborn, but by his irresponsible behavior, he was putting himself in the shadows, disqualifying himself to be the leader of the family or to fulfill this destiny. I'm not going to be a senator like Grandpa. I'm not going to be a public figure like my father. And the spotlight turned to Jeb. The expectations were on Jeb. And once the spotlight was off George W. Bush and he was in the shadows, he thrived. He found Laura, he found his faith, he recovered from his drinking problem and other problems, whatever they might be.
But during that interesting period of growing up, sort of the Prince Hal period from Henry V, where he's going messing around, chasing whatever, drinking, using drugs, you're saying that period was a period in which he was trying to say, I'm not doing it my old man's way.
I think it was his salvation. When I did the first book, All the President's Children, I thought, you know, his irresponsible behavior saved his life. I mean, John Adams II dies an alcoholic at 31, William Henry Harrison Jr. at 25, all the juniors, they died. Calvin Coolidge Jr. was 16 when he died. When John F. Kennedy Jr. disappeared over the Atlantic, I had chills go down my spine.
Did he resent the
fact, this research.
Doug,
so how did George W. Bush escape it? I believe he escaped it because there was no pressure on him. There was no expectations for him to do anything.
Was his renegade behavior, and we've been through it, it's in the book here, this drug, the whole thing, the alcohol, the too much alcohol, the drug use, the clearly admission that he used marijuana, the suggestion, as you say, apparently, and everybody can judge the tapes whether he's saying, I'm not going to deny it, or I did, but I did do it, however you want to read that. Was that all part of his anger that he wasn't the select successor, that he wasn't Jeb, that they'd picked a better looking, taller, cooler guy, and he wasn't the pick of the litter? Is that why he behaved like that?
There's no doubt there's something beneath the surface. I don't know what it is. Nobody can know what it is. But I can tell you
because it's a fascinating question.
It's a fascinating question.
Was his growth, was his decision to throw away the drugs, throw away the booze, marry Laura, become this sort of grown-up Christian guy, was that all because he said, damn it, Dad, you didn't pick me, but I'm picking me?
Did you see the movie Journeys with George?
I read your book. I know what you're saying in here.
Yeah, Journeys with George. She brings him to the front of the bus. His guy might win the presidency. She sits down with him, Alexandra Pelosi, and she says, what about the little guy? If you're elected president, what are you going to do for the little guy? You know what his answer was?
I am the little guy.
I am the little guy. Jeb is 6'4". I'm 5'11". So yes, it's there. I remember walking in the Oval Office in 1990, and Barbara was in the office with 41, and she turned to me. She knew I was talking to George and said, tell him not to run. This was running for governor in 1990. They didn't want him to run, and that spilled out in public when Barbara said, let's face it, Jeb is like his dad. George is too much like me.
You know, a lot of guys my generation, I'm almost the same age as the president, a little older actually, it bugs me once in a while, but I'm a little older. The fact is that a lot of guys our generation who saw themselves going into the civil service, going into top government jobs, not even thinking about the presidency, obviously, were very careful not to use drugs because they never want to be asked the question, did you ever use drugs? If he used them, and he say, well, clearly on that tape said, I tried marijuana at least, he wasn't even thinking about becoming president at the time he was doing that, right?
And that was his salvation. I don't want to say whether he used drugs or not. It was his salvation because it took the expectations off. These baseball players, they get these big contracts, and they walk out there, and everybody in the crowd is saying, this at-bat is $6,000. He strikes out, it costs us $6,000. Everybody thinks they're corrupted by the big contracts. I believe from this 17 years of study, they're not corrupted. They're under enormous pressure. And his irresponsible behavior, whatever it was, I don't want to get in arguments over whatever it was, but whatever it was, it took him out. In 1987, Allen Ginsberg was eliminated as a nominee for the Supreme Court because he had used marijuana. And in George W. Bush's mind, there was no chance, there was no pressure on him, and I think that was his salvation.
So your basic thesis of your book is because he was lying fallow, because he wasn't being trained to be president, he was able to grow up his own way and become himself today.
He didn't have the pressure. He didn't have the pressure. Well, it's one of the theses of the book.
Well,
the other big one is the role of the mother. I mean, you look at John Fitzgerald Kennedy, named after his mother, Rose Fitzgerald.
That's
we all
the only
know.
thing he had in common with her.
Richard Milhouse Nixon was named after Hannah Milhouse. Lyndon Baines Johnson after Rebecca Baines. Ronald Wilson Reagan after Nellie Wilson. On and on it goes. Woodrow Wilson.
What's that do?
The psychologists say that in the first months of life, that even the candidates, John Forbes Carey was named after Rosemary Forbes, that the love of the mother, the perceived favor of the mother, very Freudian, empowers the child, and the absent father. The fact that the father either dies young for a president or in the case of Bush was never there, causes the son, empowered by a love of a mother, to reach out to get the approval of the father.
We got to come back. LBJ used to say that the mother married up, the kid's going to run for president.